An orphaned beggar girl tenderly feeds a disabled boy. The millionaire's son. Given only 6 precious months to live. The autumn sun filtered through the golden leaves of Central Park as 7-year-old Emma Rose walked carefully in line with the other children from Sunshine Children's Home. Her small hand clutched a wrinkled cereal bar. Her afternoon snack. Saved from lunch because she'd learned that hunger could strike at any moment. For 2 years. Ever since the car accident that took her parents. Emma had bounced between foster homes and shelters. 6 months ago. She'd arrived at Sunshine. And while it wasn't perfect, Mrs. Patricia Williams, the supervisor, was kind. Emma had learned to help the younger children, especially those who seemed lost or scared. She understood that feeling all too well. During their supervised free time, Emma noticed something that made her heart ache. A little boy, perhaps 6 years old, sat alone in a wheelchair near the duck pond, tears streaming down his face. His brown hair caught the sunlight and his small hands gripped the armrests of his chair as soft sobs escaped his lips. Emma looked around. The other children were playing on the swings. And she could see Mrs. Patricia talking with another supervisor near the benches. The boy was completely alone. Without hesitation, Emma broke away from the group and approached him carefully. She'd learned from helping other children that sudden movements could be scary. "Hi," she said softly, crouching down to his eye level. "My name is Emma. Are you okay?" The boy looked up with startling blue eyes, still glistening with tears. He tried to speak, but only managed a small hiccup. Emma's heart melted. She unwrapped her precious cereal bar and broke it in half, offering him the larger piece. "Are you hungry? Sometimes when I'm sad, food helps a little bit." To her surprise, the boy reached out with shaky hands and accepted the offering. As he took a small bite, Emma noticed something remarkable. His crying began to subside. "My name is Oliver," he whispered, his voice barely audible. For the next few minutes, they sat together in comfortable silence, sharing the simple snack. Emma told him about the ducks on the pond and pointed out shapes in the clouds, using the same gentle voice she used with frightened children at the shelter. Suddenly, hurried footsteps approached. A tall man in an expensive suit was rushing toward them, his face etched with worry and panic. "Oliver. Thank God. There you are." The man dropped to his knees beside the wheelchair, his relief palpable. "I've been searching everywhere. Where's Maria?" "Daddy," Oliver said simply, reaching for his father's hand. "This is Emma. She shared her food with me." Alexander Mitchell looked up at the small girl who stood protectively beside his son's wheelchair. In her worn clothes and with her earnest expression, she seemed like an angel who had appeared when Oliver needed her most. "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means." Emma smiled shyly. Oliver was sad. Nobody should be sad alone. As Alexander helped Oliver with his wheelchair, he noticed something extraordinary. His son, who rarely accepted food from strangers due to his feeding difficulties, had not only taken the cereal bar but had stopped crying completely. In 18 months of therapies and treatments, he'd never seen Oliver respond to someone so quickly. "Emma." Mrs. Patricia's voice called from across the park. "Time to go. Sweetheart." As Emma waved goodbye to Oliver, Alexander watched her small figure join the group of children heading toward the park exit. Something stirred in his chest. A feeling he hadn't experienced since Oliver's diagnosis. Looking down at his son, who was now calm and even attempting to smile, Alexander made a decision that would change all their lives forever. He had to see that little girl again. Alexander Mitchell stood beside Oliver's wheelchair, watching the group of children from Sunshine Children's Home disappear into the distance. His mind raced with questions about the remarkable little girl who had appeared like a guardian angel when his son needed her most. "Daddy, will I see Emma again?" Oliver asked, his voice still soft, but clearer than it had been in weeks. The question hit Alexander like a thunderbolt. In the 18 months since Oliver's cerebral palsy diagnosis, countless therapists, specialists, and caregivers had tried various approaches to help his son. None had achieved what this 7-year-old girl had accomplished in 15 minutes, genuine comfort and connection. "I hope so, buddy," Alexander replied, though he had no idea how to make that happen. As they made their way through the park, Alexander's phone buzzed. His assistant confirmed that Maria Santos, Oliver's regular caregiver, had rushed home due to a family emergency. The temporary replacement had lost track of Oliver during the transition. A mistake that could have been catastrophic. But instead of disaster, they'd found Emma. 20 minutes later, Alexander spotted Mrs. Patricia Williams near the park's main entrance, checking names on her clipboard as children boarded a small bus. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Excuse me." Alexander approached respectfully. "Are you with Sunshine Children's Home?" Patricia looked up, taking in his expensive suit and confident demeanor. "Yes. I'm Patricia Williams, the program supervisor. Is everything all right?" "More than all right." Alexander smiled, glancing at Oliver. "One of your children, Emma Rose, just showed incredible kindness to my son. I wanted to thank her personally, but she'd already left." Patricia's expression softened. "Emma has a special gift with other children, especially those who are struggling. She's been through quite a lot herself, but always thinks of others first. Could you tell me more about her?" Alexander asked carefully. "I'd like to make a donation to your organization. And perhaps, would it be possible for Emma to visit Oliver sometime? Under proper supervision." "Of course." Patricia studied Alexander's face, noting the genuine concern in his eyes. After 15 years in child services, she'd developed an instinct for people's true intentions. Emma lost her parents 2 years ago in a car accident. Patricia explained quietly. "She's been in our care for 6 months now. She's bright, compassionate, and remarkably resilient. But any visits would require extensive background checks, social worker evaluations, and official approval." Alexander nodded. "Understanding. Whatever it takes." "I've never seen Oliver respond to anyone the way he responded to Emma today." Patricia looked down at Oliver, who was listening intently despite his fatigue. "What's your son's situation, if you don't mind me asking?" "Cerebral palsy. Diagnosed 18 months ago," Alexander replied. "He has difficulty with speech, eating, and mobility. Today was the first time in weeks he's accepted food from a stranger. Emma has experience with special needs children at our facility. Patricia observed. She volunteers to help during meal times and reading sessions. The staff often comments on her natural intuition. Alexander pulled out his business card. Mitchell Holdings Corporation. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss a substantial donation to Sunshine and to begin whatever process is necessary for supervised visits. Patricia accepted the card. Recognizing the company name. Mr. Mitchell. I appreciate your generosity. But I want to be clear. Emma's well-being comes first. She's already experienced significant loss and abandonment. We can't allow her to form attachments that might be temporary or unstable. I understand completely. Alexander assured her. I'm not looking for a temporary arrangement. What I saw today between Emma and Oliver was something special. I believe they could help each other. As the bus engine started, Patricia made a decision. Call our main office tomorrow morning. Ask for Sarah in administration. She'll start the paperwork for visitor approval. The process typically takes 3 to 4 weeks. Alexander shook her hand gratefully. Thank you, Mrs. Williams. You won't regret this. As they watched the bus pull away, Oliver tugged on his father's sleeve. Daddy. Emma said nobody should be sad alone. Will she help me not be sad? Alexander knelt beside his son's wheelchair. His heart full of hope for the first time in months. I think she might. Oliver. I really think she might. But as they headed home, Alexander had no idea that his stepmother, Victoria, was already planning to investigate every detail of Emma Rose's background. And that she wouldn't like what she discovered. That evening, Alexander sat in his study at the Mitchell mansion, reviewing legal documents his attorney had prepared for the visitor approval process. The paperwork seemed overwhelming, but his determination remained unwavering. Oliver had slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, murmuring Emma in his dreams. The sound of heels clicking on marble announced Victoria Sterling's arrival before she even knocked. Alexander's stepmother entered without invitation. Her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression stern. Alexander. Darling. We need to talk. Victoria announced, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Margaret mentioned something disturbing about your afternoon adventure. Alexander looked up from his papers. If you mean Oliver's breakthrough with a remarkable little girl, then yes. It was quite something. A little girl from a state institution. Victoria corrected sharply. Alexander. You're talking about bringing a stranger, a potentially damaged child, into our home to interact with Oliver. Have you lost your mind? Her name is Emma Rose. And she showed Oliver more genuine compassion in 15 minutes than most adults show in a lifetime. Alexander replied firmly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Compassion or manipulation? Children from these facilities learn survival tactics. Alexander. They know how to appear helpless and appealing to wealthy benefactors. She's 7 years old. Victoria. Exactly my point. She's learned these behaviors early. Victoria stood and began pacing. I'm hiring Blackstone Investigations first thing tomorrow morning. If you insist on pursuing this foolishness, we'll at least know what we're dealing with. Meanwhile, across town at Sunshine Children's Home, Emma lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Mrs. Patricia had explained that important paperwork needed to be completed before she could see Oliver again. But Emma couldn't understand why making friends required so many forms. Why can't I just visit him like at school? She had asked innocently. It's more complicated than that. Sweetheart. Patricia had replied gently. But we're working on it. 2 days later. Victoria received the preliminary investigation report. In her pristine office. She read with growing satisfaction as the private investigator detailed Emma's behavioral patterns at Sunshine. Subject exhibits protective tendencies toward younger or vulnerable children. The report stated. Staff notes include incidents where subject became difficult to manage when witnessing distress in other children. On 3 occasions. Subject refused to leave crying children's sides despite staff instructions. Victoria highlighted those passages with particular interest. To her, this wasn't compassion. It was evidence of controlling behavior and potential boundary issues. The report continued. Subject has been described by staff as mature beyond her years and intuitive with special needs children. However, previous foster placements ended due to subject's resistance to separation from younger children in the homes. Victoria smiled coldly. Perfect ammunition. At the Department of Children's Services, caseworker Linda Rodriguez began processing Alexander's formal request for supervised visitation rights. The standard protocol involved extensive background checks, home safety evaluations, and psychological assessments for both the child and requesting family. Mitchell Holdings Corporation. Linda noted. Recognizing the name. This will require extra scrutiny given the family's high profile. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly. Each step requiring forms, approvals, and waiting periods that seemed designed to test the patience of everyone involved. Back at Sunshine, Emma asked Mrs. Patricia daily about visiting Oliver. Each time, Patricia could only say, "We're still waiting for approval, honey." Emma didn't understand why helping someone required permission from strangers who had never met Oliver. In her young mind, if someone was sad and you could help, you simply helped. The adult world of regulations and procedures seemed unnecessarily complicated and cruel. 3 weeks into the process, Victoria scheduled a lunch meeting with her attorney to discuss protecting family interests should the visitation be approved. She had already begun formulating plans to ensure that Emma Rose would never become more than a temporary presence in their lives. But Victoria had underestimated one crucial factor, a father's love for his son. And Alexander Mitchell's growing conviction that Emma was exactly what Oliver needed to heal. The battle lines were being drawn. Though Emma remained blissfully unaware that her simple act of kindness had triggered a war for Oliver's future. 3.5 weeks after their chance encounter in Central Park, the call finally came. Patricia Williams answered her office phone to hear Linda Rodriguez from Children's Services delivering the news she'd been hoping for. Supervised visitation has been approved for Emma Rose with the Mitchell family, Linda announced. Twice weekly. 2-hour sessions with mandatory supervision by qualified staff. The arrangement will be reviewed monthly. Patricia immediately called Alexander with the news. Within hours, he had arranged transportation for Emma's first official visit to the Mitchell mansion. Emma pressed her face against the car window as they drove through the gates of the estate. The mansion seemed like something from her favorite fairy tale books. All stone columns and manicured gardens. But her excitement was tempered by nervousness. This felt different from their spontaneous meeting in the park. Margaret Hayes, the kind-faced housekeeper, greeted them at the front door. "You must be Emma," she said warmly. "Oliver has been asking about you every day." Dar. Rachel Morrison, Oliver's child psychologist, was waiting in the sunlit living room. She was younger than Emma had expected, with friendly brown eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Emma at ease. "I've heard wonderful things about you, Emma." "Dar," Morrison said. "Oliver talks about sharing cereal bars and cloud watching. Would you like to see him?" Oliver was in his specially equipped playroom, surrounded by colorful therapy tools and adaptive toys. When he saw Emma, his face lit up with pure joy, though he seemed more subdued than in the park. "Emma," he called out, his speech clearer than before. But this reunion felt different. Patricia sat nearby with her clipboard. "Dar," Morrison observed from across the room. And even Alexander maintained a respectful distance. The spontaneous magic of their first meeting was replaced by careful supervision and documented observations. Emma approached Oliver's wheelchair cautiously. "Hi, Oliver. Do you remember me? You shared food." Oliver replied solemnly. "You were nice to me. For the first 30 minutes. Both children seemed constrained by the formal atmosphere. Emma was polite but less natural, while Oliver appeared confused by the structured environment. "Dar." Morrison recognized the issue immediately. "Perhaps you'd both like to play with the building blocks," she suggested. "Emma. Oliver enjoys creating towers before his afternoon snack time." As Emma began stacking colorful blocks, talking softly about making castles for brave princes, Oliver gradually relaxed. When she started humming a simple tune she'd learned at Sunshine, the same melody she used to calm frightened children during stormy nights, Oliver joined in with wordless sounds that matched her rhythm. "Remarkable. Dar," Morrison whispered to Patricia, making notes in her journal. "His anxiety levels are dropping significantly." Alexander watched from the doorway, his heart swelling as he observed the natural bond reforming between the children. Despite the formal constraints, the breakthrough came during snack time. Oliver, who typically required extensive coaxing and specialized feeding techniques, accepted apple slices when Emma demonstrated eating them first, making small appreciative sounds that encouraged him to try more. "Please," Oliver said clearly, looking directly at Emma rather than the adults. By the end of the 2-hour session, Oliver had spoken 12 distinct words, more than his average for an entire week. He had also engaged in sustained play activity and demonstrated improved fine motor control while building with Emma. As Patricia prepared to take Emma back to Sunshine, Oliver began showing signs of separation anxiety. "Will Emma come back?" he asked his father urgently. "Yes, buddy. She'll visit again on Thursday," Alexander assured him. During the car ride home, Emma was unusually quiet. Finally, she asked Patricia, "Why did it feel different today?" "In the park, Oliver and I were just friends. Today, everyone was watching us like we were performing in a play." Patricia chose her words carefully. Sometimes when adults want to help children, they need to make sure everything is safe and proper. The watching isn't because you did anything wrong. It's because everyone wants to make sure you and Oliver are happy. That evening, Dar. Morrison submitted her first official report. Supervised visitation shows exceptional therapeutic value for patient. Recommend continuation with reduced supervision as comfort levels increase. But she had no idea that Victoria Sterling was already planning her next move to disrupt the growing bond between Emma and Oliver. The call came on a Thursday morning just as Alexander was reviewing reports in his study. Dar. Harrison's voice was carefully measured. The tone doctors use when delivering news that changes everything. Alexander. We need to discuss your test results immediately. Can you come in this afternoon? 3 hours later. Alexander sat in the sterile office, staring at brain scans that showed a mass near his temporal lobe. Dar. Harrison explained with clinical precision. Benign meningioma. Not cancerous, but positioned dangerously close to critical areas. Surgery is necessary. Dar. Harrison continued. The procedure itself is complex, requiring a skilled neurosurgical team. Recovery will be extensive, at least 6 weeks of limited activity followed by months of careful monitoring. Alexander's mind immediately went to Oliver. What does this mean for my ability to care for my son? You'll need full-time assistance during recovery. No lifting. Limited mobility initially. And complete rest for the first 2 weeks post-surgery. Driving home. Alexander felt the weight of impossible choices. Oliver required constant care, specialized attention, and emotional stability. The thought of leaving his son during the most vulnerable period of his own life was unbearable. That afternoon, Emma arrived for her scheduled visit. She immediately noticed something different about Alexander. The way his shoulders slumped. How his usual warm smile seemed forced. While Oliver worked on a puzzle nearby, Emma approached Alexander quietly. At 7 years old, she had developed an acute sensitivity to adult distress. A survival skill learned through loss and uncertainty. Mr. Mitchell, she whispered. Are you sick? Alexander looked down at this perceptive little girl, surprised by her directness. I need to have an operation. Emma. Nothing too serious. But it means I'll need to rest for a while. Emma's eyes widened with concern. Will you be okay? Will Oliver be okay? We'll both be fine. Alexander assured her, though his voice lacked conviction. Emma disappeared briefly, returning with her small backpack. She unzipped a hidden pocket and carefully withdrew a small cloth bag that jingled softly. These are my special coins, she announced solemnly, placing the bag in Alexander's hands. Mrs. Patricia says I'm saving them for emergencies. Maybe they can help buy medicine to make you better. Alexander opened the bag to find an assortment of quarters, dimes, and pennies. Perhaps $3 total. But the gesture hit him like a physical blow. This child, who owned virtually nothing, was offering her entire savings to help him. Emma, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is the most generous gift anyone has ever given me. Medicine is expensive. Emma replied matter-of-factly. When kids at Sunshine get sick, sometimes they can't afford it. I don't want Oliver to be sad if his daddy can't get better. That evening, after Emma returned to Sunshine, Alexander called Patricia Williams. I need to ask you something unusual, he began. During my recovery, would it be possible for Emma to stay here as a temporary guest? Oliver's stability depends on routine, and Emma has become crucial to his emotional well-being. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Alexander, what you're describing would require emergency guardianship or temporary custody arrangements. That's not a simple visitor approval. It's a complete legal process involving court hearings, home studies, and extensive evaluations. How long would that take? Months. Under normal circumstances. And given your upcoming medical situation, the courts might view your household as temporarily unstable for a child in state care. Alexander felt the walls closing in. The very medical condition that made Emma's presence essential might also make it legally impossible. There has to be a way, he said desperately. Oliver has made more progress in 3 weeks with Emma than in 18 months of therapy. I understand, Patricia replied gently. But the system is designed to protect children from unstable situations, even well-intentioned ones. As Alexander hung up the phone, he realized that saving his own life might mean devastating his son's fragile progress. The irony was cruel. The surgery that would preserve his future with Oliver could destroy Oliver's present stability. Unknown to Alexander, Victoria had already been monitoring his medical appointments through carefully placed contacts. His vulnerability would provide the perfect opportunity for her final assault on Emma's place in their lives. Victoria Sterling had always prided herself on being 3 steps ahead of any potential threat to the Mitchell family's stability. When her contacts at Alexander's medical practice discreetly informed her about his upcoming surgery, she knew opportunity had arrived. Wrapped in crisis. Within hours of learning about Alexander's condition, Victoria was seated across from Jonathan Blackwell, one of Manhattan's most formidable family law attorneys. His corner office overlooked Central Park, though Victoria's focus was entirely on strategy, not scenery. The situation is straightforward, Victoria explained, sliding a folder across the mahogany desk. My stepson is about to undergo major brain surgery. During his recovery, he's considering placing a state ward a 7-year-old girl with documented behavioral issues in his home to care for his disabled son. Blackwell reviewed the private investigator's report on Emma, noting the highlighted sections about her difficulty accepting separation and protective tendencies. What exactly are you asking me to do, Mrs. Sterling? I want legal grounds to prevent this arrangement from moving forward. Alexander's judgment is clearly compromised by his medical condition and emotional attachment to this child. Blackwell steepled his fingers. Emergency guardianship requires court approval based on the best interests of the child. If we can demonstrate that placing Emma in a household with a post-surgical patient creates an unstable environment. Exactly. Victoria smiled coldly. I'm not targeting the child directly. I'm protecting her from an inappropriate placement during a medical crisis. That afternoon, Victoria's legal team filed a formal objection with the family court, citing serious concerns about child welfare during the proposed temporary guardianship. The motion argued that Alexander's upcoming surgery and extended recovery period made their household unsuitable for a vulnerable child from state care. The filing included character references from medical professionals confirming that post-surgical patients require quiet environments, restricted activity, and focused care conditions incompatible with supervising a 7-year-old with documented attachment difficulties. Meanwhile, Alexander met with his own attorneys to discuss expedited guardianship procedures. What should have been a straightforward process had suddenly become a legal battleground, with Emma caught in the crossfire. Victoria's motion has merit. From a procedural standpoint, Alexander's lawyer admitted reluctantly, courts prioritize child safety over family preferences. Your upcoming surgery does create grounds for questioning the stability of your household. At Sunshine Children's Home, Emma sensed the growing tension during her visits. The adults spoke in hushed tones and exchanged worried glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Oliver, too, seemed more anxious, as if he could feel the uncertainty surrounding them. Why do grown-ups need so many papers to be nice to each other? Emma asked Patricia after a particularly tense visit where 3 different social workers had observed and taken notes. Patricia knelt to Emma's eye level. Sometimes adults have to follow rules to make sure children are safe and protected. But I am safe with Oliver and Mr. Mitchell. Emma replied with 7-year-old logic. They're kind to me. Isn't that what matters? Patricia's heart ached. How could she explain that kindness wasn't always enough in a system designed to protect children from situations that might appear loving but hide dangers? The legal maneuvering intensified over the following week. Victoria's team presented medical experts who testified about the challenges of post-surgical recovery, while Alexander's attorneys gathered character witnesses and therapy reports documenting Oliver's improvement with Emma's presence. Dr. Morrison found herself caught between professional ethics and personal observation. Her clinical notes clearly showed Oliver's progress with Emma. But she couldn't ignore the legitimate concerns about household stability during Alexander's recovery. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, just 5 days before Alexander's surgery. Judge Patricia Hendricks would review all evidence and determine whether emergency guardianship could proceed. Emma, unaware of the legal battle being fought over her future, continued her visits with innocent determination. During Thursday's session, she noticed Oliver seemed sadder than usual. "Are you worried about your daddy's operation?" she asked gently. Oliver nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "What if he goes away like your mommy and daddy did?" Emma took his hand carefully. "Mr. Mitchell is going to a special doctor to get better. He's not going away forever. And I'll stay with you. So you won't be scared." But as Emma made that promise, she had no idea that Victoria's legal machinery was already in motion to ensure she would be nowhere near Oliver when Alexander went under the surgeon's knife. The following Tuesday afternoon brought unexpected warmth to the Mitchell mansion sunroom, where Emma and Oliver had settled into their most comfortable visit yet. Despite the legal storm brewing around them, Dr. Morrison had noticed something remarkable. The children's bond was deepening beyond their initial connection. Oliver sat in his adapted chair, carefully stacking blocks while Emma demonstrated patterns. For the first time since his diagnosis, he was initiating activities rather than simply responding to prompts. "More blocks, please," Oliver said clearly, looking directly at Emma rather than the adult supervising nearby. "That's a new phrase." Dr. Morrison whispered to Patricia, making notes. "He's never requested continuation of an activity so directly." Alexander watched from his reading chair, medical clearance papers for next week's surgery forgotten in his lap. In these quiet moments, he saw glimpses of the family he'd never imagined possible. "Emma," Alexander said gently, "can I tell you something about when I was little?" Emma looked up from the blocks, her expressive eyes showing the mature attention that always surprised adults. "Were you sad sometimes, too?" Alexander nodded slowly. "My parents were very busy people. They worked all the time and thought that buying expensive things was the same as showing love. I spent most of my childhood with nannies and housekeepers, just like Oliver does now. But you love Oliver differently," Emma observed with startling perceptiveness. "I can see it in your eyes when you watch him." "How can you tell?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious about this child's unusual insight. "At Sunshine, some adults look at us like we're problems to solve. But you look at Oliver like he's a treasure you're protecting," Emma explained simply. Oliver, following the conversation with growing interest, suddenly spoke up. Emma makes me feel treasured. 2. The words hung in the air like a small miracle. Dar. Morrison stopped writing entirely. Recognizing the significance of Oliver expressing complex emotions verbally for the first time. Alexander's throat tightened with emotion. Emma. Would you tell us about your parents? Emma's face brightened with memory. Mama used to sing while making breakfast and Daddy would dance with her in the kitchen. They said silly things to make each other laugh and they always had time for stories before bedtime. She paused. Then added with touching innocence. They didn't have much money. But they had lots of time for loving each other and me. That sounds like a beautiful family. Alexander said softly. They were. Emma agreed without sadness. Simply stating a fact. And now I think maybe families can happen more than once. Like maybe loving people find each other when they need to. Oliver reached toward Emma's hand. Thank you. Emma. He said carefully. Pronouncing each word with determination. Dar. Morrison nearly dropped her pen. Oliver had never spontaneously expressed gratitude before. And the clarity of his speech was remarkable. Over the following hour, Oliver demonstrated progress that should have taken weeks. He attempted to feed himself crackers when Emma ate hers first, showing him it was safe. During his physical therapy exercises, he tried harder when Emma counted alongside the therapist, turning medical necessity into a game. His muscle resistance is decreasing significantly. The physical therapist noted quietly. Normally, he fights these movements. But with Emma here, he's almost cooperative. As the session neared its end, Alexander made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Emma. How would you feel about having dinner with Oliver and me tonight? Mrs. Patricia could stay. Of course. And Margaret makes excellent spaghetti. Emma's eyes widened. This was beyond their usual structured visits. This felt like family time. Could we really? She asked, looking to Patricia for permission. Patricia hesitated, knowing that dinner together would cross another boundary in their carefully managed relationship. But Oliver's hopeful expression and the documented progress convinced her. One dinner. She agreed. But I'll need to clear it with my supervisor first. 20 minutes later, they sat around a small dining table in the breakfast nook rather than the formal dining room. Margaret had prepared simple spaghetti with tomato sauce, knowing it was easier for Oliver to manage. As Emma helped Oliver twirl his pasta, both children giggling at the mess they were making, Alexander felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't a therapy session or a supervised visit. This was family dinner, chaotic and imperfect and absolutely perfect. Daddy. Oliver said suddenly. Can Emma stay for breakfast? 2. The question pierced Alexander's heart. Tomorrow he would meet with lawyers to formalize emergency guardianship papers. Next week he would undergo surgery that could change everything. But tonight, in this moment, his son was asking for the one thing that seemed impossible to guarantee. We're working on it, buddy. Alexander promised, meeting Emma's trusting gaze across the table. We're working very hard on it. The call came at 3:47 a.m. On a Friday morning, jarring Alexander from restless sleep. Blinding pain shot through his skull like lightning, followed by nausea so intense he could barely reach for the phone. 911. What's your emergency? I need an ambulance. Alexander managed through gritted teeth. Severe head pain. Scheduled for brain surgery next week. Margaret found him collapsed in the hallway 20 minutes later. Barely conscious as paramedics worked to stabilize him for transport. The tumor had shifted, creating dangerous intracranial pressure that couldn't wait for scheduled surgery. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Harrison made the grim announcement. "We're taking him into emergency surgery immediately. The pressure buildup could cause permanent damage if we delay any longer." By 7 a.m. As Alexander lay unconscious in preoperative preparation, Victoria Sterling was already in motion. Her phone call to Judge Hendricks was strategically timed early enough to demonstrate urgency. Late enough to suggest she tried to handle the situation privately first. "Your Honor, Alexander Mitchell has been hospitalized for emergency brain surgery. His household is now medically unstable. And we have a 7-year-old state ward scheduled for visits today. I'm requesting immediate intervention for the child's protection." Judge Hendricks, reviewing the overnight medical reports, saw legitimate grounds for concern. Issue a temporary emergency order for the child's removal from the Mitchell Visitation Program. Effective immediately. Transfer her to the appropriate state facility until Mr. Mitchell's condition stabilizes. At Sunshine Children's Home, Patricia Williams received the court order at 8:15 a.m. With growing horror. The legal document was ironclad: Emma must be transferred to Albany State Children's Facility by noon that same day. "This is unconscionable," Patricia protested to her supervisor. "Emma's stability depends on her connection with Oliver. This separation will devastate both children. Court orders aren't suggestions." "Patricia, we have no choice." Emma was playing quietly in the recreation room when Patricia approached. Her heart breaking at what she had to explain to this innocent child. "Emma. Sweetheart. I need to talk to you about something important." Emma looked up from her coloring book, immediately sensing the gravity in Patricia's voice. "Is Mr. Mitchell okay? Is Oliver okay?" "Mr. Mitchell had to go to the hospital for his operation earlier than planned," Patricia explained gently. "And because of that, you need to go stay at a different home for a while." Emma's crayon stopped mid-stroke. "A different home? But what about Oliver? He needs me when his daddy is sick." "I know, honey. But sometimes grown-ups have to follow rules that don't make sense to children." Within 3 hours, Emma's few belongings were packed into a small suitcase. As the state transport van arrived to take her to Albany, she pressed her face against Patricia's shoulder. "Please tell Oliver I didn't want to leave him," Emma whispered. "Tell him I'll come back as soon as the grown-ups fix their papers." Patricia hugged her tightly, unable to promise anything. Meanwhile, at the Mitchell mansion, Oliver was experiencing his own crisis. Dr. Morrison had arrived for their scheduled session, only to be told by Margaret that both Alexander and Emma were gone. "Where's Daddy? Where's Emma?" Oliver asked repeatedly, his voice becoming increasingly agitated. "Your daddy is getting better at the hospital," Dr. Morrison explained carefully. "And Emma had to go stay somewhere else for a little while." Oliver's face crumpled with confusion and terror. In his young mind, people who went away didn't always come back. And now both of the most important people in his world had disappeared simultaneously. By afternoon, Oliver had stopped speaking entirely. He refused his lunch, pushing away even his favorite foods. When Dr. Morrison attempted their usual therapy exercises, Oliver began hitting his own legs with his small fists. A self-destructive behavior that alarmed everyone present. Oliver. Sweetheart. Please don't hurt yourself. Dr. Morrison pleaded, gently restraining his hands. But Oliver's only response was to turn his face toward the window where he and Emma had watched clouds together. Tears streaming silently down his cheeks. By evening, Dr. Morrison was documenting the most severe regression she'd ever witnessed in a pediatric patient. Oliver had lost weeks of progress in a single day, retreating into a silence that felt impenetrable. At Albany State Children's Facility, Emma lay on an unfamiliar bed in a room with 3 other girls, staring at the ceiling. The facility was institutional and cold. Nothing like sunshine's warmth or the Mitchell mansion's comfort. She clutched her small bag of emergency coins. The ones Alexander had tried to return but she'd insisted he keep, in case Oliver needs them. Now she wondered if Oliver would ever know she hadn't abandoned him willingly. 300 miles apart. Both children cried themselves to sleep. Victims of adult decisions that prioritized legal protection over emotional connection. Victoria Sterling slept peacefully that night, satisfied that she'd successfully removed what she viewed as a destabilizing influence from Oliver's life. She had no idea that her actions had just triggered the most devastating period in her grandson's young existence. Alexander Mitchell awakened on Sunday afternoon to the sterile hum of hospital machinery and a pounding headache that felt like construction work inside his skull. The emergency surgery had been successful, but his recovery would be longer and more complex than originally planned. Margaret Hayes sat in the bedside chair, her usually composed face etched with worry lines that had nothing to do with his medical condition. Margaret? Alexander's voice was hoarse from the breathing tube. How long have I been out? 3 days. Margaret replied, then hesitated. Alexander. There's something you need to know. Emma is gone. The words hit him harder than the surgical pain. Gone. What do you mean? Gone. Margaret explained the emergency court order, Victoria's intervention, and Emma's immediate transfer to Albany. With each detail, Alexander's blood pressure monitor began beeping more rapidly. And Oliver? Alexander asked, though Margaret's expression already provided the answer. He's struggling. Dr. Morrison says he's had a complete regression. He won't eat, won't speak. And yesterday he started. Margaret's voice broke. He started hurting himself. Alexander. Hitting his legs with his fists. The sound of expensive heels on hospital linoleum announced Victoria's arrival before she appeared in the doorway, carrying flowers and wearing a carefully composed expression of concern. Alexander. Darling. Thank goodness you're awake. We've all been so worried about you. Alexander stared at his stepmother with dawning clarity. You did this. You orchestrated Emma's removal while I was unconscious. Victoria moved closer to his bed, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. I protected our family from an unstable situation. You were having emergency brain surgery. For heaven's sake. A 7-year-old with attachment issues had no business being in our home during a medical crisis. Attachment issues? Alexander's voice grew stronger despite his physical weakness. She's a child who lost her parents and learned to care for others. That's not pathology. Victoria. That's resilience. She's manipulative. Victoria insisted. The investigators found clear evidence of her inability to accept separation. Her history of becoming difficult to manage when removed from situations she wanted to control. Alexander tried to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain in his head. You twisted compassion into pathology. You saw a little girl caring for other children and labeled it as manipulation. I saw a vulnerable child being placed in an inappropriate situation by a man whose judgment was compromised by illness and desperation. Victoria shot back, her mask of concern slipping. Oliver needs professional care. Not some untrained child who happened to share a snack with him. Oliver needs love. Alexander replied firmly. Something you've never understood. Margaret cleared her throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately. Stay. Margaret. Alexander commanded. Then fixed Victoria with a steely gaze. I want a witness to what I'm about to say. Victoria. As of this moment, you no longer have any legal authority over Oliver's care or my medical decisions. I'm instructing my attorneys to remove all your powers of attorney and exclude you from any decisions regarding my son's welfare. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You're making a terrible mistake. Alexander. That child will destroy Oliver's progress. She'll create dependencies that will cripple his development. The only thing destroying Oliver's progress is your interference. Alexander replied coldly. Dar. Morrison documented more improvement in 3 weeks with Emma than in 18 months of traditional therapy. Temporary improvement based on emotional manipulation. Based on genuine connection. Alexander interrupted. Something you wouldn't recognize if it was documented in triplicate. Victoria straightened her shoulders, preparing for one final assault. You're still recovering from brain surgery. Alexander. Any court will question your judgment during this period. Fighting me will only delay Oliver's proper treatment. Oliver's proper treatment includes Emma. Alexander said with finality. And if you continue to interfere, I'll make sure you never see either of us again. As Victoria stormed from the room, Alexander turned to Margaret with desperate urgency. How bad is Oliver? Really? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Dar. Morrison wants to hospitalize him. He's lost 4 pounds in 3 days and shows signs of severe dehydration. They're worried about his kidneys. Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. His stepmother's cruelty had triggered a medical crisis in his son that might have permanent consequences. Get me a phone, he said grimly. I'm calling every lawyer, judge, and social worker in New York if necessary. Emma is coming home. And Victoria Sterling will never hurt my family again. But as Alexander began his battle to reunite the children, Oliver was being admitted to Mount Sinai's pediatric wing, where doctors were inserting N4 to combat the dehydration caused by his grief-induced hunger strike. The war for Emma's return had begun. But time was running out for Oliver's fragile recovery. At Albany State Children's Facility, Emma Rose had become a shadow of the vibrant child who once brought joy to Sunshine Children's Home. 5 days into her enforced separation from Oliver, she lay awake each night on the narrow institutional bed, staring at ceiling tiles while her roommate slept. The nightmares came without fail, Oliver sitting alone in his wheelchair, crying for food that no one would give him. In her dreams, she could see him growing thinner and sadder, calling her name while she remained trapped behind locked doors, unable to reach him. Emma, you need to eat your breakfast, urged Miss Janet. A kind but overworked supervisor who had noticed the 7-year-old's dramatic change in behavior. Emma pushed the soggy cereal around her bowl without taking a bite. "Is Oliver eating?" she asked for the dozenth time that week. "Honey, I don't have information about Oliver. But I'm sure he's being well cared for." Emma's young face crumpled with a guilt she was too young to understand. "I promised him I wouldn't leave. He must think I'm a liar. Like the adults who promise things and then disappear." Meanwhile, back at Sunshine Children's Home, Patricia Williams was dealing with her own crisis. Several of the younger children, particularly those with special needs whom Emma had helped during meals and bedtime, were showing signs of distress at her sudden absence. 5-year-old Marcus, who had autism and severe anxiety, refused to eat lunch without the gentle melodies Emma hummed to help him feel calm. 8-year-old Sophia, who had been learning to walk with braces, kept asking when the nice girl who tells stories would come back to help with her exercises. Emma made everything feel safer. Patricia explained to her supervisor during their weekly review. She wasn't just another child here. She was a stabilizing force for our most vulnerable kids. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Morrison was documenting the most severe case of childhood depression she'd encountered in 15 years of practice. Oliver had been hospitalized for 4 days, requiring 4 fluids to combat dehydration from his persistent refusal to eat or drink. The patient exhibits classic symptoms of abandonment trauma. She wrote in her clinical notes. Complete withdrawal from social interaction, self-harm behaviors, and what appears to be a grief response typically seen in children who have lost a primary caregiver. The pediatric nurses had tried every technique in their arsenal. Child life specialists brought therapy dogs, art supplies, and favorite foods. But Oliver remained unreachable, curled in his hospital bed with his face turned toward the wall. He keeps saying one word. Nurse Patricia Gonzalez reported during morning rounds. Just Emma. Over and over. Like a prayer. Dr. Morrison's heart broke each time she checked on Oliver. She had witnessed his remarkable progress with Emma, the speech improvements, increased appetite, and social engagement that had given everyone hope. Now, watching him waste away from grief, she felt professionally and personally devastated. From his own hospital bed 3 floors above, Alexander Mitchell waged a frantic legal campaign via phone and laptop. His attorney, David Chen, delivered increasingly discouraging updates about the bureaucratic maze they faced. Emergency reversals of child placement orders require extraordinary circumstances, David explained during one of their daily calls. Even with Oliver's hospitalization, the system views this as proving Victoria's point about household instability. How long? Alexander asked bluntly. Realistically, 2 to 3 months minimum. We need to file appeals, request new hearings, and present comprehensive evidence that Emma's return serves both children's best interests. The court won't rush a decision that could set precedent for future cases. Alexander's post-surgical fatigue made the legal complexities feel overwhelming. David, my son is literally dying of grief. How is that not extraordinary enough? Because the system is designed to protect children from volatile situations, even when those situations involve well-meaning families. Emma's previous placement changes and Oliver's medical needs create red flags that judges won't ignore easily. That evening, Dr. Morrison made an unprecedented decision. She called Patricia Williams directly, bypassing normal administrative channels. Mrs. Williams. I need to ask you something confidential. In your professional opinion, would Emma's return genuinely help Oliver's condition? Patricia didn't hesitate. Dar. Morrison. I've worked with children for 20 years. What Emma and Oliver have isn't dependency. It's mutual healing. They both became better versions of themselves together. Would you testify to that in court? Absolutely. But will it make a difference? Dar. Morrison looked through Oliver's hospital room window, where the little boy lay motionless under sterile white sheets. It has to. Because if we can't bring Emma back soon, I'm not sure Oliver will survive losing another person he loves. 300 miles away. Emma fell asleep, clutching her emergency coins, whispering the same prayer she repeated every night since her arrival in Albany. Please let Oliver know I didn't choose to leave him. Please let him eat something today. The children's suffering was becoming unbearable for everyone who witnessed it. But the legal system moved at its own pace, indifferent to the emotional carnage left in its wake. After 8 days in the hospital, Alexander Mitchell was finally cleared for discharge, though his recovery remained incomplete. The surgical incision was healing well, but his energy levels were still limited, and he required careful monitoring for several more weeks. Take it slow. Dar. Harrison advised as Alexander signed his discharge papers. No strenuous activity. Plenty of rest. And follow-up appointments twice weekly. But Alexander had no intention of taking anything slowly. The moment he arrived home, he transformed his study into a war room, surrounding himself with legal documents, medical reports, and contact lists for every influential person he'd ever known. David. I want you to assemble the most aggressive legal team money can buy. Alexander told his attorney during their first in-person meeting since the surgery. File emergency motions. Request expedited hearings. And challenge every aspect of Victoria's interference. His investigation into Victoria's tactics revealed a disturbing pattern of manipulation. Through strategic donations to key political figures and carefully placed calls to family court administrators, she had expedited Emma's removal in ways that should have taken weeks to accomplish. She used the family name and foundation connections to fast-track the transfer order. Private investigator Marcus Webb reported. Normal processing time for child placement changes is 10 to 14 days. Emma was moved in less than 6 hours. Meanwhile, Dar. Morrison and Patricia Williams had begun coordinating their official testimonies for the emergency hearings. Dar. Morrison's clinical documentation showed Oliver's dramatic regression in stark medical terms that even the most skeptical judge couldn't ignore. I've documented a 40% decline in verbal communication, complete loss of appetite requiring medical intervention, and the emergence of self-harm behaviors directly coinciding with Emma's removal. Dar. Morrison explained to the court reporter. This isn't typical separation anxiety. It's clinical depression in a 6-year-old child. Patricia Williams' testimony was equally compelling. Emma Rose demonstrated remarkable therapeutic instincts with Oliver Mitchell. Their interaction produced measurable improvements in both children's emotional and developmental functioning. At Albany State Children's Facility, social worker Sarah Chen had been assigned to Emma's case and was growing increasingly concerned about the little girl's condition. Sarah was young, idealistic, and still believed the system could work for children rather than against them. Emma, can you tell me how you're feeling about being here? Sarah asked gently during their private session in the facility's counseling room. Emma sat with her hands folded in her lap, her once bright eyes now dull with sadness. I'm supposed to be taking care of Oliver, she said simply. That's my job. Your job? Sarah probed carefully. Can you explain what you mean? When people are sad or scared, I help them feel better. Oliver needs help eating and not being afraid. Without me, he might forget how to be happy. Sarah felt her heart clench. This wasn't a 7-year-old playing house. This was a child who had found genuine purpose in caring for another vulnerable person. How does it make you feel when you can't help Oliver? Emma's composure finally cracked. Useless, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Like when my parents died and I couldn't save them either. Maybe I'm not good at taking care of people after all. That afternoon, Sarah Chin did something that could have ended her career. She called Patricia Williams directly, bypassing normal administrative channels. Mrs. Williams, I've reviewed Emma's file and interviewed her extensively. This child is experiencing clinical depression related to her separation from Oliver Mitchell. In my professional opinion, the current placement is causing significant psychological harm. Patricia almost dropped the phone. Are you saying you support Emma's return? I'm saying I'm initiating an immediate welfare evaluation that could expedite her return if the evidence supports it. Emma's mental health is deteriorating daily, and the Albany facility isn't equipped to provide the specialized support she needs. For the first time in weeks, Patricia felt a spark of hope. What do you need from us? Everything. Medical records, therapy notes, video documentation of Emma and Oliver's interactions. I need to build an irrefutable case that separation is causing harm to both children. That evening, Alexander received the call he'd been praying for. Sarah Chen had officially recommended Emma's immediate return, pending a comprehensive welfare review. It's not guaranteed, David Chen warned him. But having a social worker from the receiving facility support the transfer is unprecedented. Sarah Chen is risking her career to advocate for Emma. Alexander looked through the window toward Oliver's empty playroom, where toys sat untouched since Emma's departure. Then we better make sure her courage isn't wasted. How quickly can we move? Emergency hearing is scheduled for Friday. If everything goes perfectly, Emma could be home by next week. As Alexander ended the call, he felt hope stirring in his chest for the first time since awakening from surgery. The system that had torn his family apart might finally work to bring them back together. But 3 days was an eternity when measured in a sick child's heartbeats. Friday's emergency hearing lasted 4 grueling hours. Judge Patricia Hendricks reviewed medical records, therapy notes, and testimony from 5 different professionals before making her decision. The evidence clearly shows that separation has caused measurable harm to both children. Judge Hendricks announced, I'm granting immediate supervised custody of Emma Rose to Alexander Mitchell, with intensive monitoring from Child Services. Alexander felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. After 6 weeks of legal battles and watching Oliver waste away, Emma was finally coming home. But the reunion wasn't the joyful celebration he'd imagined. When the state transport van arrived at the mansion Sunday afternoon, Emma emerged slowly, clutching a small bag and looking far more fragile than the confident child who had first shared her cereal bar with Oliver. Hi, Mr. Mitchell, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Welcome home, Emma. Alexander replied gently, noting how she stayed close to Sarah Chen's side. Inside, Oliver was waiting in his wheelchair by the window where he'd spent most of the past 6 weeks. When he saw Emma, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tears streamed down his face as he reached toward her with shaking hands. "Emma! Emma!" he cried, his voice hoarse from weeks of minimal speaking. But Emma hesitated. The spontaneous child who once rushed to comfort crying children now approached cautiously, as if afraid Oliver might disappear again. "Hi, Oliver," she said softly, staying several feet away. "I missed you." Dar. Morrison, observing the interaction, noted the visible trauma in both children. Emma's usual confidence was replaced by careful weariness, while Oliver's desperate reaching showed how deeply the separation had affected him. "Would you like to sit together?" Dar. Morrison suggested gently. Emma looked to Sarah Chin for permission before slowly approaching Oliver's chair. When Oliver grabbed her hand, she didn't pull away, but her body remained tense. "I thought you left me forever," Oliver whispered. "I didn't want to leave," Emma replied, her 7-year-old voice carrying pain no child should experience. "The grown-ups made me go away." Over the following hour, their reconnection unfolded gradually. Emma's natural caregiving instincts slowly emerged as Oliver's genuine need for her comfort overcame her fear of another forced separation. When Oliver attempted to eat crackers for the first time in weeks, Emma instinctively began humming the soft melody she'd used during their early visits. Oliver's face relaxed, and he actually swallowed several bites. "Remarkable." Dar. Morrison whispered to Alexander. "His eating response is immediate." By the session's end, Oliver had spoken 12 complete sentences, more than his total words from the entire previous week. Emma had smiled twice, though her watchfulness never completely disappeared. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Oliver asked as the visit concluded. Emma looked at Alexander uncertainly. "Can I?" "You're staying here now, Emma," Alexander assured her. "This is your home." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Not of sadness, but of cautious hope mixed with residual fear. "Promise?" "I promise." That night, Emma lay in the guest room that had been prepared as her bedroom, staring at the ceiling much as she had at Albany. But this time, she could hear Oliver's breathing from the room next door and Margaret's gentle footsteps in the hallway. For the first time in 6 weeks, both children slept peacefully, though Emma's hand remained clenched around her emergency coins. A reminder that security could disappear without warning. Alexander, checking on them before bed, realized that healing would take time. The system had returned Emma's body, but recovering her trust would require patience, consistency, and the gradual rebuilding of faith that love could be permanent. The hardest work was just beginning. 3 weeks after Emma's return, the Mitchell household had established a new rhythm. Alexander had hired Miss Jennifer Walsh, a certified teacher, to provide Emma with personalized education while maintaining her connection to Oliver's daily routine. Emma's reading comprehension is remarkable for her age. Ms. Walsh reported during her weekly progress meeting with Alexander. She's testing at a 4th grade level in most subjects. But more importantly, Emma's personality was slowly re-emerging. The cautious, withdrawn child who had returned from Albany was gradually being replaced by glimpses of her former confident, nurturing self. The breakthrough came during Oliver's physical therapy session. When Oliver struggled with his leg exercises, growing frustrated and tearful, Emma instinctively moved to his side. "Remember what we practiced about being brave," she said gently, taking his hand. "Sometimes our bodies need extra time to learn new things." Oliver's tears stopped immediately. Not only did he complete his exercises, but he attempted 2 additional repetitions. Something he'd never done before. "I want to be strong like Emma," Oliver declared, forming his clearest sentence yet. Dar. Morrison documented remarkable progress in both children. Oliver's vocabulary had expanded to over 50 words. He was eating independently during most meals, and his physical coordination showed measurable improvement. Emma's anxiety levels had decreased significantly, though she still occasionally asked for reassurance about staying permanently. The structured routine Alexander had established included morning lessons for Emma, joint therapy time with Oliver, family lunch, afternoon educational activities, and evening story time. Both children thrived under the predictable schedule. Structure provides security for children who've experienced trauma. Dar. Morrison explained. Emma needs to know what comes next, and Oliver benefits from the consistency. Victoria Sterling made her final attempt at reconciliation on a Thursday afternoon, arriving unannounced with an expensive gift for Oliver and a carefully rehearsed apology. "Alexander, I realize I may have been hasty in my concerns about Emma," she began, her tone carefully modulated. "Perhaps we could discuss a gradual reintegration of my involvement in Oliver's care." Alexander's response was immediate and final. "Victoria, you nearly destroyed my son's health and Emma's well-being through your manipulation. You have no place in our family anymore. But Oliver is my grandson. Oliver is my son. And Emma is going to be my daughter," Alexander stated firmly. "You made your choice when you prioritized control over their happiness." Victoria left without another word, her attempts at reconciliation definitively rejected. That afternoon, Dar. Morrison submitted her official recommendation to the court. Continued placement of Emma Rose with the Mitchell family serves the best interests of both children. Their mutual progress and emotional stability demonstrate a successful therapeutic relationship that should be preserved permanently. Based on her recommendation, Alexander's attorneys filed formal adoption papers. The process would take several months, but the foundation was solid. During dinner that evening, Oliver surprised everyone by making an announcement. "Emma is my sister now," he said clearly, looking directly at her. "Right, Daddy?" Alexander smiled, his heart full. "That's right, Oliver. Emma is your sister." Emma's face lit up with the first truly spontaneous smile they'd seen since her return. "I always wanted a brother," she said softly. That night, as Alexander tucked both children into their beds, Emma asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Mr. Mitchell, when I become officially your daughter, will my name change?" "Only if you want it to," Alexander replied. "What would you like?" Emma considered carefully. "Emma Rose Mitchell sounds nice, but I want to keep Rose because it was my mama's middle name." 2. Emma Rose Mitchell it is, Alexander promised. For the first time since the ordeal began, the future looked bright for their unconventional but deeply loving family. 6 months after Emma's return, the formal adoption hearing was scheduled for a crisp October morning. Judge Hendricks had requested a comprehensive review before making the life-changing decision permanent. Alexander sat in the courthouse with Emma beside him, both dressed in their finest clothes. Oliver, now strong enough to attend, waited in his wheelchair with Margaret and Dr. Morrison. "Are you nervous?" Emma whispered to Alexander. "A little," he admitted. "Are you?" Emma considered this seriously. "I'm excited, nervous. Like when good things might happen. But you're not sure yet." The hearing began with testimony from Patricia Williams, who had driven down from Sunshine Children's Home specifically for this moment. "In 20 years of child services, I've never seen a placement that better served a child's needs," Patricia testified. "Emma Rose has flourished in the Mitchell family. She's confident, academically advanced, and has maintained her natural compassion while developing appropriate boundaries." Sarah Chen followed with her professional assessment. "Emma's psychological evaluation shows remarkable resilience and emotional stability. The trauma from her temporary separation has resolved completely, and she demonstrates secure attachment patterns with both Alexander and Oliver Mitchell." Dr. Morrison's testimony focused on the unprecedented therapeutic success. "Oliver's progress with Emma as his sister figure has exceeded every medical expectation. His vocabulary now includes over 200 words. He feeds himself independently. And his physical coordination has improved dramatically. This isn't just family placement. It's medical necessity." When Judge Hendricks called Emma to the witness stand, she walked forward with quiet dignity, her small hand raised to take the oath. "Emma, do you understand what adoption means?" Judge Hendricks asked gently. "Yes, Your Honor. It means Mr. Mitchell becomes my real daddy forever. And Oliver becomes my real brother forever. And how do you feel about that?" Emma's face lit up. "Happy. Really. Really happy. I love taking care of Oliver. And Mr. Mitchell takes good care of both of us. What if there are difficult times? All families have challenges." Emma nodded solemnly. "When my first parents died, I learned that love doesn't stop just because things get hard. Real families stick together." The courtroom fell silent at the profound wisdom in her young voice. Judge Hendricks then addressed Oliver directly. "Oliver, how do you feel about Emma becoming your official sister?" Oliver straightened in his wheelchair and spoke clearly. "Emma is already my sister. She makes me brave and helps me eat and tells me stories. I love her." The judge smiled, clearly moved by Oliver's testimony. After reviewing all documentation, she made her decision. "The evidence overwhelmingly supports this adoption. I am ordering this adoption to be finalized today." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Emma hugged Alexander tightly while Oliver clapped from his wheelchair. That afternoon, Dr. Harrison delivered the final piece of good news. Alexander's latest brain scans showed complete recovery with no signs of tumor recurrence. "You're cleared for all normal activities," Dr. Harrison announced. "Your prognosis is excellent." That evening, they celebrated with a small party at the mansion. Margaret prepared Emma's favorite spaghetti, while Oliver proudly showed off his improved coordination by feeding himself without assistance. As they sat around the dinner table, now truly feeling like family, Alexander raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To Emma Rose Mitchell, who taught us that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose." Emma giggled, then grew serious. "To Oliver, who taught me that taking care of people can be my superpower." Oliver beamed. To Daddy, who keeps us all safe. 8 months after their chance meeting in Central Park, Emma Rose stood before Judge Hendricks in a white dress that Margaret had helped her choose for the formal adoption ceremony. It was small but perfect. With just Alexander, Oliver, Dar, Morrison, Patricia Williams, and Sarah Chen in attendance. Emma Rose. Do you take Alexander Mitchell as your legal father? Judge Hendricks asked with a warm smile. Yes, Your Honor. Forever and always. Emma replied, her voice clear and confident. Oliver, now sitting straighter in his specially adapted ceremonial chair, served as the honorary ring bearer, carefully holding the small family ring that had belonged to Alexander's grandmother. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I pronounce you father and daughter. Emma Rose Mitchell. Welcome to your forever family. The courtroom erupted in gentle applause as Alexander lifted Emma into a jubilant hug. Oliver clapped enthusiastically, his motor skills now strong enough for coordinated movement. Are we really a family now? Emma whispered in Alexander's ear. We were a family from the moment you shared that cereal bar. Alexander whispered back. 3 months later, Alexander established the Emma and Oliver Foundation, dedicated to supporting special needs children and improving foster care services. Emma, now 8 and thriving academically, helped design a mentorship program where she worked with other children experiencing family transitions. I know what it feels like to be scared about new families, Emma told Patricia during one of their volunteer sessions at Sunshine. But sometimes the scariest changes bring the most love. Oliver's progress continued to astound his medical team. He was now attending Riverside Academy's special education program, had mastered basic self-feeding, and could form complex sentences. Most remarkably, he had developed his own caregiving instincts, often comforting younger children during their therapy sessions. Victoria Sterling signed her final legal settlement in November, renouncing all future claims to the Mitchell family in exchange for a substantial financial agreement. Her last words to Alexander's lawyer were simply, "Tell them I hope they're happy." 1 year after Emma's adoption, Alexander stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his children prepare sandwiches together. Emma patiently guided Oliver's hands as he spread peanut butter, both of them giggling at the mess they were making. "Daddy, we made lunch," Oliver announced proudly, holding up their creation. "It's beautiful," Alexander replied, his heart overflowing with gratitude. That evening, as they sat together reading bedtime stories, Emma looked up from her favorite book. "Daddy, I figured something out," she said thoughtfully. "What's that?" "Sweetheart, family isn't about having the same parents from the beginning. It's about choosing to love each other every single day, even when things get hard." Oliver nodded sagely. "Like how Emma chose to share her food with me. And you chose to adopt Emma. And I chose to be the best brother ever." Alexander smiled, pulling both children closer. "And how we all choose to take care of each other. Always." As he tucked them into bed, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them together. A chance encounter in a park had become the foundation for something extraordinary. Not just a family, but a testament to the power of compassion, perseverance, and love. Emma Rose Mitchell fell asleep that night, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with people who would never make her leave. And for the first time since her parents' death, The future held only promise. If this story of love, resilience, and found family touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you more powerful and inspiring stories just like this one. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you for being part of our community.